In this video, I'd like to explain the referential integrity constraints. A referential integrity rule simply says if B reference is A, then A must exist. So using the foreign key, we will talk about how to enforce this referential integrity constraints. There are four options possible: restriction option, nullification option, cascading option, and the default option. Using SQL Server from Microsoft, I will explain each option and how it works one by one. Explain the referential integrity constraints. We will create two tables in the schema practice. So first I will create a schema practice and then create a emp table, practice.emp, and in the emp table we'll have emp ID, L name, salary, and the department number. And then we're going to enter data. So we will enter the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows. Okay. And then we'll create a department table, and in this department table we'll have 3 columns: department ID, department name, and the budget. And then we'll enter data. Okay, so for your convenience, it's already there in your tutorial. So what you need to do is make a copy from here all the way down to the end of data entry for department. Okay, and copy it and then paste it on your editor. Okay, so we will create a one schema practice and 2 tables in the schema, department table, DEPT, and employee table, EMP, and then we'll populate those 2 tables. Okay, so let's execute them. Okay, execute over here. Alright, looks okay. So let's take a look. Let's go to tables, refresh it, right mouse button, refresh. Okay, so here we have a department table and the employee table. And then let's go to schemas. We have a practice schema. Cool. Alright, so let's check the data. It's always a good idea to understand the data before you do anything using SQL. Okay. So, well, let's create a new query window so that it can be easier to see it. So here we have, we'll have a select star from, let's look at emp first. And then we will, let's take a look at the DEPT table together. Okay, and execute. Right, so we have employee table 101 all the way to 106, and department table from 100 all the way to 999. Okay, so let's look at the data. So employee 101 is working for department 100, and the 103 is working for 200, and so on. In case of 105, we don't have any the information about departmental affiliation. Okay, so if you want to know more about the 101's department, like a department name and budget, what you need to do is using this information 100, we need to go to the department table, okay, and pull the information about 100, like a management and the $25,000. So in case of a 200, okay, in case of 103, and he or she is working for department 200, okay, so we need to go to a department table and obtain the information about department 200. Okay, the problem is if there is no, let's say, department 400 in the department table, there will be an integrity problem. So basically what this one is saying is, if you know more about department, let's say 100, 200, 300, or 400, and that department must be existing in the department table. Otherwise, integrity of these tables will be violated. So to enforce this referential integrity, we will create a foreign key on the department number column of employee table. Okay, let's define a foreign key. So I'll go to database. This is mine, so I need to go to your own database and find the tables, and then practice.emp. And in this practice.emp table, we have columns of employee, name, salary, and department number. So we'll create a foreign key on this one, department number, referencing department ID, which is a PK, primary key of a practice.dept table. Okay. All right, so let's do it. So can you see the keys under the practice.emp? Click the right mouse button, a new foreign key. So let's look at this screen. So here you can find the fk emp. That's a temporary name for the foreign key you are trying to define. Make sure you have only one. When you try this process many times, you're going to end up with many foreign keys over here, so like this. Okay, and if you do that, you're going to have a lot of errors. So if you have only one foreign key on your table, you have to make sure there's only one. So anything you don't need, make sure you delete it. Okay, so anyhow, so let's take a look at how you're going to do that. So can you find this one, tables and the columns specification here? All right, let's make it a little wider. Okay, can you see that? Tables and the columns of specification. Okay, let's open that. And then this one actually specify where you're going to define a foreign key, as you can see over here. All right, so can you see that little box with a dot dot dot, 3 dots? Okay, let me open it. Alright, so primary key table and the foreign key table. So the primary key table will be practice DEPT, okay? And the foreign key table will be EMP, that's correct. And the primary key table, obviously we should use a primary key. That's the attribute or column which will be referenced by the foreign key. Okay, and we are defining a foreign key on depth number deptno. So it looks okay. And why don't you notice the name actually has been changed from fk emp to fk emp depth. That sounds about right. So this one can imply foreign key is defined on emp referencing a department DEPT table. So it looks okay. So let's say okay. Alright, so it looks fine. And also look at the last one here about enforcement of the referential integrity constraints. Okay, if you click it, you will see two rules: delete rule and update rule. As we discussed before, there are 4 options available: no action or restriction, cascade, set null, and set default. Okay, so we'll look at it one by one. So now we'll just take these options: no action for delete and no action for update. Sounds cool. Close it. Okay, also make sure you save the definition. Okay, and yes. Alright, so it's done. So go back to keys and click right mouse button and refresh. So now we know it is a defined over here. As usual, we can do this using a graphical user interface or SQL statement. So let's look at how the SQL statement actually looks like. So go there, right mouse button, can see that script key as create to new query editor window. Okay, and click it, and this is how it looks like. Okay, so let's check a the first enforcement option, restriction. Okay. All right, so let's look at the data again. So here we have 101 working for 100, 102 working for 100, and so on. Okay. So for example, if you delete or update the department 100 in the department table, let's delete it first. If you at least try to delete 100, okay, and if it is allowed, these employees 101, 102, and their department ID, department number 100, will not have a matching value in the department table, and consequently it will violate the referential integrity. Okay, so let's take a look how the first enforcement option works. Okay, so let's try to delete department 100. So what this does is delete a department 100 from the department table, practice.dept table. The first option says a restriction, so this one should not be allowed. So let's see how it goes. Okay. All right, cool. So it's not allowed. So delete the statement conflict with the referential constraint, the foreign key you just defined. Okay, so it's not allowed. So if you look at the data again, obviously 100 is still there. So the first option of restriction for delete working just fine. How about the next one, like update? So if you change the department ID of this department table from 100 to 110, okay, and then these information over here, this department number values again will not have a matching value in the department table, so they will consequently then violate the referential integrity. Okay, so let's take a look. So here we have for department 100, we'll update the department ID to 110. Okay, so usually it should be fine, but in this case there's a foreign key on here referencing the department ID of the department table. So if it is allowed, the referential integrity will be violated. Okay, so let's execute that and see how it goes. Good. So it's not allowed. Okay, because it will violate the referential integrity. Okay, so let's take a look at the data. What happened? Well, as you can see here, nothing happened. Okay, now let's look at a different case. For example, if you enter a new employee, let's say working for 600, okay, and that may cause a problem because we don't have any department with the department ID 600. So insertion of employee working for 600, department number 600, is allowed. There will be a violation of referential integrity. Okay, so let's take a look. So let's enter the employee, let's say 200, Thompson making 78,000 and working for 600. So looks fine, but if you look at 600, there's no matching department ID of 600. So if he's actually allowed, then there will be again violation of referential integrity. Okay, so let's see how it goes. Okay, so we select this statement and execute it, and then as expected, so it is now allowed because it would violate the referential integrity. So the first option of restriction for enforcing referential integrity working great. All right. Okay, now let's try the second option of cascading. All right, so go to the foreign key, the FK amp department, okay, and double click it, or you can modify it. Can you see that? Modify. Okay, and then go to this option, insert and update the specification. And for delete, let's change it to a cascade option. And for update, also change it to a cascade option. Okay, and close it. And again, make sure you save it. And yes. Alright, so it looks cool. So again, let's look at the data. So here we have the original data, 101 all the way to 106, and 100 all the way to 999. So let's try the same thing we did. Let's try to delete department 100 over here. Okay. Previously, that was not allowed because we had an option for restriction. Okay. So in Cascade option, when you delete this one, all the referencing rows in the employee table, they should be also cascade deleted. So 101 and 102, they should be deleted if we delete department ID 100 from the department table. Okay, so let's see how it works. Okay, so let's delete a department ID 100. Okay. So it's allowed. Okay, so let's take a look at the data. So as predicted, 100 is now cascade deleted. Also, employees 101 and 102, they are also cascade deleted. So as you can see over here, when you use a cascade option, you have to be careful, all right, because you may delete more than you want to delete. Okay. Okay, now let's check the cascade option for update. Okay, so let's check, let's update department ID 200 to, let's say, 220, and then see how it goes. Okay, so so we want to change the 200 to 220. Since we are taking now cascade option, this one should be allowed to 220. And any referencing the rows over here, in this case 103, and their department number, then should be updated, cascade updated to 220. Okay, so let's see how it goes. So let's choose that statement and execute. All right, so it is fine. So let's look at data. So as you can see over here, the 200 is now updated to 220, and 103, the department affiliation, also is changed to 220. So cascade option for delete and update are working just fine. Okay, the third option for enforcement is a set default. Okay, so first we need to set a default value for the department number. So what we are trying to do is let's say if you delete let's say department 300, okay, now we allow that, but at the same time any referencing row in the employee table, let's say 104, that 300 then will be changed to a default value. Okay, so how about this? So we'll set the default for the department number as a 999. So anytime any of these department numbers are deleted from department table, we'll change it to the default value of a 999. Okay, so let's do that. So first we have to set the default value for the department number of the employee table. Okay, so let's go back to our department employee table, practice.emp. So we have to actually modify it. So can you see that design? Okay, so design, and then choose a department number. Can you see that default value or binding? Okay, so we will set the default value of 999. So what that means is if there's no value available for department number, we will actually use a 999 as actually value for the department number. Okay, so 999. Okay, so make sure you save it. Okay. All right. So let's make sure that it's actually defined correctly. So go to constraints. Okay. Click right mouse button and refresh. Okay. Can you see that? The new constraint we just defined. So go there, click right mouse button, create to new query editor window. Okay. So this is actually what happened. So we alter the table so that department number can have a default value of 999. Okay. All right. So before testing this default option, let's restore our original data so that we have more data to work with. Okay. So go to your tutorial and then get the script for insertion. Okay. Let me create a new query window. Okay. Remember, this is the data we entered originally. Okay. So let's execute this one again. Okay. Looks great. And then let's check the data as usual. So here we have original data, 101 all the way to 106, 100 all the way to 999. Okay, so all right, so let's check the let's change our enforcement option to default. Okay, so let's go back to the keys, our foreign key. Okay, right mouse button, modify. Okay. So this time we're going to change it to set default. Okay, same thing with default. All right, so change the option to a default for both delete and update rules. Close it. Make sure you save it. Looks great. Okay, now let's try to delete the department ID 100 from this department table. Okay, so since we're taking a default option, that one should be allowed. But at the same time, any referencing rows from the employee table with the department number of 100 should be changed to the default value of this column. Which is 999, as we just did. Okay, so let's take a look what's happening. Okay, so we will delete this row with the department ID 100 from department table. Okay. Okay, so this looks fine. So let's check the data. So as you can see over here, department 100 is gone from department table, and the department numbers of 101 and 102 are now changed to 999. Okay, so working okay. All right, so now let's try to change the 200 to let's say 220. Okay, and see how it goes. So if you try to change the 200 to 220, that should be allowed. But any referencing row from employee table, in this case 103, this one also has to be changed to a default value of 999. Okay, and then let's see how it goes. Okay, so for department ID 200, we'll change it to a 220. Okay. Looks fine. So let's look at the data. Okay, as we predicted, and 200 is now changed to 220, and then 103 department affiliation is now changed to 999. Okay, so looks great. And now let's check the last option, nullification option. Okay, so go back to our foreign key. Okay, and modify, insert and delete specification. So let's change it to a set null, and same thing for the update. So now we chose a nullification option for both the delete and the update rules. Okay, close it. Again, make sure you save it. And yes. Alright, it's cool. Let me close this one. So now let's try to change the, well, let's delete 300. Okay, so if we delete this 300, department ID 300 from department table, the referencing rows from employee table, in this case 104, this one will be changed to null for the department number. Okay, so let's check how it works. So we'll delete this row with the department ID of 300. Okay. All right. So let's look at the data. So as you can see over here, 300 is now gone, and also the department number of 104 is now set to null. So change it to null. Okay. All right. How about the next one for update? So let's try to update a 400 to a 440. Okay, and then see how it goes. So if you try to change a 400 to 440, that one will be allowed because we are using nullification option. But for 106 in the employee table, this 400 will be set to null. Okay, so let's take a look. All right, so for 400, we'll change it to a 440. Okay, looks good. Let's look at the data. So as you can see over here, department ID 400 is now changed to a 440. Okay, but in case of one employee ID 106, his department affiliation is now changed to a null. Okay, so since we chose a nullification option. All right, so we looked at all those 4 options: restriction, and cascading, and default, and the nullification option. All right.